Hi everyone, Rukshan here, and thanks for joining me for this episode of In Conversation. Today's guest is Neil Angus MP, a member of the Parliament here in Victoria from the Legislative Assembly from the opposition Liberal Party. But before I get to my chat with Neil, I wanted to share this video with you of Neil speaking in Parliament last week.
As a member of the Liberal Party, I stand here today to defend the very basic and vital values of this party. The values of freedom, of individual responsibility and of personal choice. I also stand here for all the people who, whether through necessity or free choice, are not receiving this vaccination. I'm standing here for the many thousands of Victorians who are about to lose their jobs tomorrow as a result of exercising their conscience and their free choice. I'm standing here for the people who have been coerced into being vaccinated. I'm also standing here for all the doctors who have been forbidden from exercising their best medical judgments for their patients. I'm standing here for the ordinary Victorians who have been silenced and forbidden from gathering together to express a point of view different from this government. I'm standing here for the many faith communities who are facing the issue of having to turn people away from their services and facilities. The result of the Premier's announcement on the 1st of October this year is that medical apartheid will be commencing in Victoria in a few days' time. Victoria will be a two-class society. A great leader will always inspire with hope and a clear vision. This is one of the most important roles and characteristics of a successful leader. A great leader brings people together and unites them. They don't divide people, especially in a time of great difficulty. They don't shame people, blame people and pit one person against another. Here in Victoria, we have never seen a more divided and broken society. The moving of this motion and the issuing of public orders to effect this for the broader community clearly demonstrates this. Victoria will become a two-tier society. Unvaccinated people will be sacked from their jobs and will be excluded from the ordinary functioning of society. Is this what we want for Victoria, especially in light of our accelerating vaccination rate?
Now that's just a snippet of the speech that Neil gave in Parliament on this particular matter we're going to be discussing. I will link to the full video in the description. Neil, thank you for joining me for this discussion.
Pleasure to be here, Rukshan. Thank you very much indeed.
So Neil, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background. And you're a member of Parliament in the Legislative Assembly representing the Liberal Party in the opposition. So for the viewers and listeners that don't know who you are, if you can just give us a brief introduction to your background and your time in Parliament.
Sure. Well, look, thanks very much, Rukshan. And as I said, great pleasure to be with you this morning. Look, my background is that I'm a chartered accountant. So I was in public practice for over 25 years, a partner in a practice in the city for about 18 years, and I was an audit and investigations partner. So I was a registered company auditor and a certified fraud examiner. So that was as well as a registered tax agent. So that was my background, looking at numbers and seeing what the truth is in a whole lot of different situations and trying to sift through evidence and get to the bottom of particular matters. So that's my background. I ran for the Forest Hill District in 2006 and ran in 2006 and lost by 511 votes. So went back to my practice and then ran again in 2010 and managed to get over the line as I did in 2014 and 2018. So I've been just come out for my 11th year and coming to the end of the third term.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Neil. So the reason that I wanted to have a chat with you today was particularly around one of the issues that was raised last week in Parliament, which you voted on, and that was around a motion to require members of Parliament to either show their vaccination records or show an exemption to actually be allowed to enter the halls of Parliament. And you were one of the only member in the Legislative Assembly to vote against it and to to share some commentary on why you were doing that. And I just wanted to ask you what kind of, why is it that you were the only one, and what was that motion about?
So look, thanks, Rukshan. Yeah, look, the motion was purportedly there to protect the members of Parliament and, more importantly, the staff members that work at Parliament House and in the surrounding precinct from being at risk of COVID-19. So that was the genesis of it. And then it went for a page and a half in terms of the mechanics. But why I opposed that and strongly spoke against it wasn't anything to do with me or MPs at all. It was to do with the principle behind it. And that was the whole issue of freedom. And it was, you might recall, the day before that a whole lot of authorised workers were going to be subject to this mandatory vaccination requirement. And I'd been contacted by my office by countless people, as I have indeed been contacted subsequent to that, that are going to, or that were at that time going to lose their jobs. And to realise that they were not in high-risk situations, I thought that was totally inappropriate. Because we might remember, if we go back a bit, Rukshan, we can see that originally the thinking was, and I've got no quarrel with this, that people in very high-risk environments, such as in aged care or in certain areas of the health system, needed to be vaccinated to eliminate as much risk as possible in caring for the very vulnerable people in their care. So everybody agreed on that, and that was optional. People could either get it or move out of that area and be redeployed. Then that sort of crept across into various other sectors, and then it kept creeping and creeping. And all of a sudden, we've ended up with the Premier on the 1st of October announcing that this enormous list of so-called authorised workers would have to be subject to the vaccine mandate. And as I said, many of those people were not in high-risk environments at all. Many of them were already mitigating any risk that they might have had by doing other things, as we'd all been instructed to for quite some time. So I was standing there a couple of weeks ago or last week actually, to represent those people that had no voice. And as I said, many of them had contacted me about this. And, I'll read to you later some of the heartbreaking stories that have come across my desk.
Yeah. And look, I mean, you touched on the people not having a voice. And a lot of the time, with our parliamentarians, you're elected representatives to represent sections of the community. So, whether it's a small percentage, I guess, that can be debated, but there are people who are concerned about this issue. And that is why I raised the question earlier, why was it just one member of that legislative assembly that kind of spoke up against it? Is that more a reflection of the times that we're living in the sense that people have more or less, in elected positions, have decided to not question certain types of advice, particularly around health advice? Or is it more of a sense of, this is kind of what's politically most expedient to do? Like, how does that happen, I guess, is what I'm trying to get to the bottom of.
Yeah, look, that's a very, very good question, Rukshan. And I suppose from my observation, I think there's probably two camps. One is members of the government. They know that they could never speak out against a decree from the Premier. They would be sacked. So if I was a member of the government team, I would have been would have been attempted to be sacked the very next day, I think, or later that afternoon. On our side, on the Liberal Nationals team, we have to go through a process. So I'd gone through a process with my team and advised the leader and the party whip, according to the constitution of the parliamentary team, that I was going to exercise my conscience on this matter. So no one was surprised, and I'd gone through the appropriate channels and protocols to do that. But look, you raise, as I said, an excellent question. I think many members of Parliament, possibly on both sides, have just got used to the mantra from the government and the Premier and his ministers in relation to this matter, and perhaps aren't thinking quite as deeply about it as perhaps they might ordinarily, because we've been on this treadmill for so long and people are worn down, and MPs are very, very busy. My colleagues are extremely busy dealing with many complex issues. So, but for me, as I said, I tried to step back from it, see that it wasn't to do with me or any MP. This was a bigger issue. And my big concern, and I said it during the speech, words to this effect, that the issue is, where are we going to draw the line on this? What is next? Since when does a democratically elected government decree medical procedures for people? I think we're getting into very turbulent waters here. And so for me and for the constituents that I represent, I wanted to stand up in that place and be a voice for them.
And for anyone that's listening or watching that hasn't seen that speech, I will play portions of it as a part of this discussion. Just to touch on another one of your quotes, you said something to the effect of medical apartheid will be commencing in Victoria in a few days' time. Victoria will be a two-class society. And I guess that has broader implications more than just within the parliament and that particular motion. That's going to the entire community, right? And to see that we are actually going into a time period in our country's history, in our state's history, where there's a very obvious division between people based on a certain choice or decision that they've made, and that impacts not just their day-to-day lives, like their social lives, whether it's going to a wedding or the pub or whatever it is, but it also impacts their work, their ability to earn a living. Now, that's never really ever happened in our society, like in modern day Australia. So the implications of having a two-tier society, like how damaging do you think that is into our future as well?
I think that's incredibly damaging because people's lives are being destroyed. And I'll give you some examples shortly, but this is very real. This is not a theory. People are going to be shut out from things in Melbourne, in Victoria, in Australia. People are going to be shut out. So again, it's not about me in any sense, but I can just use myself as the guinea pig. For example, I'm pretty, as you can probably see, I'm in pretty bad need of a haircut. And I'm unable to do that. I'm unable to go and see my hair guy. I mean, he'd be very happy to do it. He's a friend of mine. He'd be very happy to do it, but I can't afford to go to his business and risk a significant fine for him for seeing someone that is not double vaxxed. So, and that's just one example that comes straight off the top of my head. I mean, there's countless other examples where people won't, even as the Premier himself said yesterday, no unvaccinated person will go to the Grand Prix next year. And that's extraordinary. I mean, we've got like complete segregation.
And he said well into 2022, like he didn't really want to give a time period where things like other states, like I know New South Wales, for instance, they've alluded to the fact that potentially sometime this year, just to use this turn of phrase, the unvaccinated and the vaccinated can commingle and do some activities together, right? Whereas in Victoria, Daniel Andrews has pretty much come out and flat out said that well into 2022, even if we reach a 90% rate of vaccination, which is very high, it's very unlikely that people that are not participating and not adhering to the mandates or getting vaccinated or however you want to term it, they will be excluded from society. And that seems a lot different to the kind of language and the tone of messaging that we were hearing a few months back when the community was being encouraged to do these things. Why do you think there's been such a drastic change in the course of a few days to really put the pressure on people to take part in all this, possibly against their own free will and choice?
Yeah, look, I think that's another excellent question, Rukshan. And the fact is that the goalposts on this whole journey seem to keep on moving. And I've said to many people over a long period of time that it's like the typical carrot on the stick. It's just out of reach, hanging over our heads, just out of reach. We've got to just keep reaching forward that little bit. And so here we've had the goalpost move from 70 to 80% to 90%. And now I'm not sure where it's going to finish up. So that's very, very concerning because clearly, and it has to be obvious, I would have thought to many people now, that these decisions cannot be based on medical advice. They're based on the whim, I would argue, the whim of the Premier. And that's very dangerous, in my opinion. Regardless of what you think of an individual as the Premier, the fact is that no one person should be able to exercise that power and split our society in the way that it's going to be split. And I might add, too, that I've been contacted by countless people, Rukshan, that have been vaccinated. So they've ticked the box, but they are still mortified by what's going on here, by having to go to a restaurant and show their papers. People are saying, this is scary stuff. And that's people like me, got nothing against vaccination, but they're saying, well, hang on a minute, how much control is the government going to have over us? And people are very concerned, and genuinely so, and rightfully so, in my
Yeah,
view.
definitely. I mean, some of the communications I've had with people as well, they're vaccinated. It's a broad section of the community who shares these concerns. And
That's
I
right.
guess another one of the comments that Daniel Andrews made yesterday at his press conference was regarding, I guess, booster shots and how that might
Yes.
play, how that might play into it. And I guess what I'm getting to at here is, as a community, like, does it make sense that people are losing confidence in government, particularly the government in power in our state? Because the comments that they're making, there's no certainty. And I think for businesses especially, you need to have that type of certainty, but also just for the general community to know that there is like a light at the end of the tunnel. And right now, we are almost back at the very start of this, uncertainty of this entire pandemic, how things are being framed. Does that lack of is it justified that people are have a lack of confidence in the government at this present point?
Well, in my view, it certainly is justified, because even the matter you just raised, Rukshan, the fact that the Premier out of his own mouth yesterday talked about the third shot, we were told 1, then 2, now 3, where is this going to end? And people rightly, in my view, are losing confidence, because, again, that's just another classic example of the goalposts moving. And so what people want to hear, and particularly what business want to hear, and I and my colleagues have been in constant contact with businesses around Melbourne, throughout the whole state of Victoria, and they are so desperate. They want a roadmap. They want a clear roadmap out of this. And at the moment, that is not being offered by this government. And even yesterday, we saw the farcical situation where there was an alleged typo, to quote the Premier, in one of the guidelines, and that made an enormous difference as to whether businesses, and particularly hospitality businesses, could or could not open. The fact that instead of having to have had one vaccination with the other one booked, they now have to have 2 vaccinations to have any staff there. So, it's easy for the public servants in town or wherever they are working away at the moment to say, but the implications for a small business operator who's desperate to trade again, to start employing people, to start paying his bills and his rent and all those things, are enormous. And I don't think anybody in the government understands that. And that's a huge problem for all Victorians.
Yeah, no doubt. And I guess for yourself and the electorate that you represent, so you said you've been in communication with a few people that have contacted you and shared their stories with you. What is that like, knowing that in many ways you can only listen sometimes, because everything that's happening around you is the thing that's causing those people that distress and that grief, whether that's around personal issues or whether that's around their business. As a member of parliament, I mean, what kind of pressure does that put you on to kind of address these issues in your electorate?
Well, look, for me personally, I feel that very deeply, because I know many of the wonderful people in the Forest Hill district and beyond, but certainly locally, that are just hurting so badly. They are just completely desperate. And you're right, they've got nowhere else to turn to. Where else are they going to turn? So, I do all I can for them, but they've had other avenues that would normally be available to them, such as through their doctors and through other professionals and advisors, shut. So, look, we try to help as many people as we can, but it's heartbreaking. And look, people in the electorate, certainly in my electorate and throughout the state, have acted in good faith. And that's what I said the other day in the Parliament. I said, people have abided by the rules. They've done what they've been asked, largely done what they've been asked without complaint. And now all of a sudden, the goalposts are moved again and their hope is being dashed. And there's only so many blows any person can take. And that's what I'm seeing. And it's been shocking, I can tell you. It's absolutely shocking when you hear people, at the end of their rope with suicidal ideation, desperate family situations, the pressure on families and marriages and children with homeschooling for the best part of 2 years. It's enormous. It starts off funny and a bit of a joke and a bit of fun, but by the time you're trying to run perhaps 1 or 2 businesses out of your house, keep your job, and look after your children, particularly if they're primary school, or even if they're not, if they're adolescents as well, it's incredibly stressful and very, very difficult. And, I think a lot of the government members just haven't got an understanding or an appreciation of that, because you wouldn't put people through it if you did.
Yeah, well, that's one of the complaints I see in the community a lot, just like off the cuff comments from the community, is that, people like yourself, I'm not judging you, but people in government who have been working throughout this entire period might not actually be understanding what people in the community are going through. So as a business owner, obviously there is support in those kind of things that the government are offering, but a lot of the community is saying that it goes nowhere in terms of covering the actual cost of, they're just hanging on based on those things. And a lot of businesses are also toppling over in our state. So that distinction between people in Parliament and people in the state system working and people in ordinary community, I mean, do you feel that in the comments that you get from people? Do people kind of relay that frustration to you? Is that where you're coming from as well? Like you hear that in the community?
Yeah, look, to a certain extent I do. And particularly, I think more so about the health bureaucrats, because many, all of them, all the public servants, me included, none of us has missed a paycheck. Now we've tried to help as much as we possibly can in our own communities, and I'm sure many MPs have been very generous in a whole range of ways. But you're right, Rukshan, the fact that no one in working for the government has felt any pain. And that's a real issue. And it's very easy for the leaders of the state to say, oh, we'll just close this down, close that down. But, when you're running a small business, every day you are not trading is less money to come in and pay the bills, pay the staff, and keep food on your own table. And I've got a keen appreciation for that, having been a partner, as I said, and running my own business for 18 years. I know what it's like. If you don't get the business through the front door, there's going to be nothing to pay the bills and look after the staff and the bank and all the other commitments that businesses have got. And that's why we sadly have seen so many businesses go under and so many sort of household name businesses. So we're going to go back down to, say, a famous street like Lygon Street. And, you and I, Rukshan, will go walk down there, as hundreds and thousands of other Victorians will, and we will be shocked, because the pizza shop or the Italian restaurant that's been there all our lives is not there anymore, because they couldn't keep going on fresh air. So it's a very real issue.
No, definitely. I've been privileged enough in my role doing media work to be able to go to some of these streets and walk around. And
yes,
it's very obvious just the state that these very famous precincts are in terms of how many for lease signs that you actually do see. It's not a media beat up when they show it to you on TV. Like, it's actually like that. And you would think that there are some businesses still hanging on to see what happens. They're on the edge, and they could also still go down. But with everything that we've talked about, I guess, what is one way that, there's a lot of kind of frustration that I sense in the community. Like I said, there's a lot of feelings within the community of having no confidence in leadership. And this is across the board, against all politicians in a way. What is kind of a message that you as a leader, particularly in your electorate, can give to the community in terms of looking forward to something positive in the future as well, and a way to kind of turn this around, and the things that we can do as a community to get to that point?
Sure. Look, that's a really big one, Rukshan, and that's really the answer. But can I just say the most important message I want to get out today is for people not to give up, not to lose hope. There's always someone to talk to. There's always someone who's willing to hear your story and try to help you. There's so many wonderful, wonderful people out in our community. Often we don't come across them necessarily on a day-to-day basis, but they're out there and they're ready, willing and able to help. So can I say that from the outset, that please reach out if you're feeling just overwhelmed. Please reach out and someone will be there to help you. There's practical needs. I know, so for me, on my social media, I put up regularly some of the practical needs that can be met locally through food, through some of my charities and faith groups, whether it's counselling, whether it's other things that people might need, some help with bills, this and that, And so that's the thing I would say. This can't go on forever. And I would urge people, please contact your local members of parliament. And I say members because you've got one member in the lower house in the state parliament, in the Legislative Assembly, and you've got 5 members in the upper house, in the Legislative Council. So there's usually a mix between government and non-government members in the Legislative Council. So can I urge people, please find out, you can easily do it by getting on the internet, find out who your upper house members are, and please call their officers and just implore them to stop moving the goalposts if they're part of the government, and allow you to re-engage with your normal life as best as possible. Because the last thing people need is for the carrot on the stick to keep getting put out further and further ahead of them, because for many people, it'll be too much. And, I've got countless examples. Would you like me to read an example for you?
Oh, yeah, sure. Please do share.
Yeah. So this is an unsolicited email. These are all unsolicited emails that I've got in the last few days, okay? So, and I've had hundreds of them. So this person says, I'm a doctor and despair every day with the insanity of what's going on. The current situation has divided my family, affected my marriage, threatening my career, threatened my children, and most of all, I have, for the first time in my life, decided that life here on earth is no longer worth living. I feel that if I cannot claim my own body and my children's own health, there is no reason to live. Every day, every passing day, all I feel is the noose tightening around our necks as this government blocks each and every pathway to a reasonable response. They are ignoring science. I have lost hope in my profession. And she goes on. And what a tragedy. I mean, that's real. That's someone's story. Here's another one. I have hope some other MPs catch on to what is actually happening in the world and stop Dan Andrews from ruining our lives by taking away our freedoms and our choices. I want the right not to participate in a trial drug and still be able to keep my job and make an honest living. I want my daughter to be able to have a choice to not take a trial drug and keep building her business that she took a chance on last year. I want her to not be under the extreme mental anguish about losing everything she has poured her heart and soul into. My husband, daughter, and I are considering leaving Victoria. I'll read another one. This is just an ordinary person. I'm being threatened by my employer to take the jab or to be put on disciplinary action or to be terminated. In the last 2 years, everyone struggled in dealing with the pandemic. We did what Victorian government asked us to do to keep everyone safe. This mandate crosses the line and is causing me so much anxiety. I've always worked and contributed to the economy, and to face such threat in my job now makes me feel sad. Here's another one, a lady who was a nurse for 20 years, now working out of a hospital, but she's treating people. She says, where I work now, every week I see young people coming in for treatment with post-vaccine issues, debilitating fatigue, neurological issues and cardiac complaints, to name a few. I'm deeply concerned by what I'm seeing. Last year I had patients who had contracted COVID and survived, even though they were from nursing homes with severe comorbidities. In 2 weeks, I will lose my current job as a nurse. Here's another one. I'll just read you a couple more if that's all right. My business is closed. My son has lost his apprenticeship. My wife's been stood down from her role, and it goes on. And this is the reality. I'll quote. These are all quotes. But this guy said, my son said to me last week that he would rather suicide than take the jab. As a parent, I am heartbroken. And, it just goes on and on. And someone else says, please, give me a whole page email entitled Victoria is in distress, and says, please, I reiterate, I'm begging you on behalf of all Victorians, don't let this insanity continue. Please, just goes on and on and on. Here's one from a person who's fully vaccinated. And this person's an employer, and he said, I don't want to be a policeman and a law enforcer. And he said, you speak for a lot of people who have chosen already to be vaccinated, as well as those who have not. So another person, my family is in despair. We are in despair and wish to know if there is any recourse or hope for the unvaccinated, and refers to the difference in New South Wales compared to Victoria. And there's another person who just says that they've been stood down without pay from this week because they just refused to give their medical information. It doesn't say whether they're vaccinated or not. They just weren't prepared to give their medical information to their employer. So that's what really motivates me, Rukshan, when I hear people's lives are in the balance and it's time for us to take some action. And, dangling the carrot on the stick, it's not working. And I'm hating to think of what the suicide numbers are going to be. I mean, I've had people email my office. I had a chap 2 weeks ago, before all this latest stuff came up. He said that in his world, this was a middle-aged guy, 2 of his mates had already taken their own lives. And that's in the last 12 months. I've had other people on the phone to me, grown men, with their businesses going down the drain in tears. And I know in that industry, there was a suicide a few weeks ago. So it's very real. And it's not, that's what I don't think many people in the health system get.
Yeah, it's quite, I mean, it's tragic and devastating to know that there's so many people in our community, like our friends, our family members, that we might not even know about going through these situations because they're not reaching out and they're not talking to people. And I just want people to know that, there is help available. I'll put some of those numbers up here,
please.
Because it is a heavy topic that we're discussing. And, these are really very real things. And just like yourself, Neil, I'm not an MP, but I put a call out on my social media just for people to email me with any kind of things that they're going through on the 14th, just to kind of get an idea of what's going on.
Right.
And, I received hundreds of emails, right? And one thing that I know, reading those emails, actually, I was quite emotional because you get the sense that these people they're just in a position that they never thought they'd ever be in their lives. And they're finding it very difficult to come to terms with some of the things which are going around them. And they're finding that people in leadership, in the government particularly, are not in any way, shape or form ready to even open a dialogue with them. And they just feel like they're being pushed aside and just, almost like the lepers of society, some people, that's how they feel. And it's just so tragic and sad to hear words from people and to have it confirmed that it's real, because I think a lot of people, if you don't engage with the community in this manner, might just see a snippet on a TV show and hear that, there's people having a hard time, but the government's going to provide them support. That's normally the line that you hear in the media, but the actual reality is a lot different. And like you said, those letters that you read out, people really are hurting in our state. And and I'd like to, there's a lot of things said about MPs and, people in Parliament that they've been working, getting paid this entire time, but I can't imagine it's been an easy time of it as well. Actually having to, because you would never have thought you'd be having these types of conversations en masse. Isn't that true?
That's absolutely true, Rukshan. Absolutely. You never think you'll end up in this situation, but as you say, I'm very privileged to have that opportunity, and my staff are working extremely hard, and I'm working as hard as I can, just day and night to try to ring people back and just to try to show them that there is a bit of hope out there. And sometimes that's, to be frank, hard to find, but we've got to say, look, the sun is still going to come up tomorrow morning. We will get through this. We don't seem to have clear guidance and timelines, but we will, and we can, and you must. And so again, I thank you for the work you're doing in putting up those resources. People need to be sure that there are people they can reach out to and talk to, and there's professionals. There's also other local organisations. So, I just urge people, please do that. A problem shared is a problem halved, and we can encourage people as best we possibly can. But look, it's a tough season now, and I know many of my colleagues are also in the same boat, working extremely hard and doing the very, very best for their communities.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Neil. On that note, we will end this discussion. And I just want to thank you again on behalf of everyone that's watching and the listeners that tune into my shows and podcasts. And just thank you for your time and just being so open, honest, and frank with us about everything that's going on in our state.
Look, thanks very much, Rukshan. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all. And can I say to everybody watching, please keep your chin up, and tomorrow's a new day, so we'll hope for better things. And well done to you on your great work you're doing, covering many of the difficult and not often seen aspects of the whole pandemic as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you very much.